Burning ships light up black water. You have been fighting for hours. You are standing on the bridge of your submarine. On the surface, in the middle of an enemy convoy you just tore apart. Tankers are going down behind you. Your torpedo tubes are almost empty. Your crew has been at battle stations since dark. You have enough kills tonight to go home a hero. Then word comes up from below. There is a second convoy, still ahead of you, still moving. Nobody would question you for turning for home. You are low on weapons, your men are exhausted, and every hour you stay here is another hour the destroyers have to find you. But those ships are carrying fuel and ammunition to men who will use them, and you are the only submarine in this strait tonight. Do you take what you already have and run for open sea? Or do you turn around with your last few torpedoes and go back in? If you were there right now, what would you do? Today, we meet the man who turned around. His name was Richard O'Kane. Before that night was over, he would command the most successful submarine in American history. For those 2 nights, the United States Navy awarded him its highest honor for valor, the Medal of Honor. 87 men sailed with him into that strait. 9 of them saw the morning, and not one of the men he lost was killed by a Japanese torpedo. Let's find out how he got there, and what it cost him. Let's find out. Before we begin, take a second to hit like and subscribe. 1911, Dover, New Hampshire. Richard Hetherington O'Kane was born there on February 2nd, the son of a scientist. His father, Dr. Walter Collins O'Kane, was a professor of entomology, a man who studied insects, a life spent looking closely at small things, pinned still under glass, on dry land. His son kept looking the other way, toward the New Hampshire coast, toward the harbor, toward the men who went down to the sea in ships. He did not go straight into the Navy. He went to Phillips Academy, then to the University of New Hampshire, his father's university, the safe road, the one already laid out for him. He left it. He wanted Annapolis, the United States Naval Academy, a congressional appointment, 1 seat, and dozens of young men competing for it. He got in May 1934. He graduated an officer of the United States Navy. It was the wrong decade to want a career at sea. The country was in the Depression. The fleet was small, promotion was slow, and there were more young officers than there were places to put them. The ones who wanted to rise wanted the big ships, battleships, cruisers, the ones with bands playing on deck when they pulled into port. Submarines were not that. In the 1930s, sailors called them pig boats, cramped, foul-smelling diesel fumes in your clothes and your food, no privacy and no daylight. A place careers went to be forgotten, and no man was ever assigned to one. You had to volunteer. O'Kane volunteered. He wanted something that worked alone, in the dark, close enough to the enemy to see his face. In 1938, he qualified for submarine duty and reported aboard USS Argonaut, one of the largest boats in the fleet. Then came December 1941. War found the Navy, and the Navy needed submarine officers who could fight, not just qualify. In early 1942, Lieutenant O'Kane was ordered to a new boat fitting out at Mare Island, California. Her name was USS Wahoo. He became her executive officer, second in command. Under her first captain, Wahoo went to war carefully, too carefully, some said. Her early patrols found few targets and sank fewer. Then, in December 1942, a new commanding officer took her over, Lieutenant Commander Dudley Mush Morton. Morton was reckless by the old Navy's rules. He surfaced in daylight. He went looking for convoys instead of waiting for one to wander past. On his first patrol in command, Wahoo sank more shipping than she had in her entire career before him. The crew that once went weeks without a target now came home only to reload. And Morton did something almost no submarine captain of that era would do. During an attack, the captain owned the periscope. It was the most jealously guarded seat in the Navy. Morton gave it to his executive officer. He stood back and let O'Kane call the targets, the ranges, the moment to fire. He wasn't using an assistant. He was building a captain. So O'Kane learned the ocean, the way his father had learned insect. He spent hours over silhouette books, memorizing the outline of every class of Japanese ship, until he could name a target from its shadow alone. Together, Morton and O'Kane took Wahoo on 5 war patrols. Ship after ship went down under her periscope. In July 1943, O'Kane was detached from Wahoo to prepare for a command of his own. 4 months later, Wahoo failed to return from patrol. Morton and every man aboard her was lost. The captain who taught him everything. The crew he had served beside for a year and a half. Gone on the one patrol he wasn't there for. He never got to say whether he would have stayed. What he kept was the way Morton fought. Get close. Stay on the surface if you have to. Never let the target go. He was about to get his own boat to prove it. October 15, 1943, USS Tang was commissioned at Mare Island. Richard O'Kane took command and never left it. His first patrols were nothing like Wahoo's cautious start. He ran his boat exactly the way he had been taught. Surface at night to close the distance fast. Dive only when daylight or danger forced him under. Never fire from farther away than he had to. But Tang did not only sink ships. In the spring of 1944, during the carrier strikes on Truk, Tang was assigned lifeguard duty, sitting in dangerous water off an enemy stronghold, waiting to pick up American pilots shot down over the target. She stayed for 3 days. At one point, a rescue float plane landed inside the enemy lagoon, loaded up 9 downed airmen, and then could not take off with the weight. Tang went in and took all of them off. By the time she left, Tang had pulled 22 American aviators out of the water. 22 men who flew home because a submarine refused to leave, ship by ship, patrol by patrol. Tang built a record that would stand among the very best of any American submarine of the war. By the autumn of 1944, she and her crew had been fighting for a year without a single quiet patrol. They knew what the odds looked like. Most boats that fought this hard, this long, did not get many more chances. October 1944, the Formosa Strait, the narrow, crowded water between Formosa and the Chinese coast. Japan's supply lines to its garrisons ran straight through it. Tang was there to cut them. On the night of October 23rd, lookouts spotted a convoy, freighters and tankers, running dark, ringed by escorts. O'Kane did what he always did. He took Tang in close, on the surface, rather than diving to shoot blind through a periscope. Torpedoes found their marks. Ships burned. Tang slid back into the darkness to reload. Then came word of a second convoy, still ahead of them. He did not need to be talked into it. Tang turned back into the strait. Near midnight on October 24th, he found them and drove his submarine straight into the middle of the formation, boldly maneuvering on the surface into the midst of a heavily escorted convoy. Commander O'Kane stood in a fusillade of bullets and shells from all directions. That is how the Navy would describe the next few minutes. He launched torpedoes into 3 tankers. All 3 were hit. He swung Tang to fire on a freighter, and in the same instant saw a transport bearing down to ram him. He gave the order. Tang cut across the transport's bow and missed being run down by inches. Now Tang was boxed in, a blazing tanker on one side, a freighter, a transport, destroyers converging from behind. Gunfire wrecked the bridge from 3 directions at once. There was no clear water anywhere, only burning ships close enough to feel the heat, and escorts closing the gap. Most captains would have crash dived long before this. O'Kane put his remaining torpedoes into 2 more targets, with explosions lighting the sea on every side of him, and cleared the area still on the surface. 2 nights, 2 convoys. This was the action that would earn him the Medal of Honor. But the fight wasn't over. 1 torpedo was left in the ship. A crippled transport was still afloat behind them, still able to be salvaged. O'Kane ordered the last one fired to finish what they had started. It left the tube and ran through for a moment. Then it curved, a circular run, a mechanical failure inside the torpedo itself. A fault no crew could have seen coming, and no crew could stop. From the bridge, they watched a bright line bend through the black water and come back toward them. He ordered emergency speed. He put the rudder over hard. 20 seconds is not enough. The torpedo struck Tang's own stern, near the after torpedo room. The explosion tore the hull open. Nearly half the men aboard were killed in the first seconds. Every ship that burned in that strait had been sunk by a weapon Richard O'Kane aimed. So was this one. Tang went down fast, in shallow water, her stern settling on the bottom, her bow still standing, almost to the surface. Inside, in the dark, 13 men reached the escape trunks and strapped on Momsen lungs, a device built to let a man breathe his way up from a sunken submarine. To use one, you had to stay calm enough to breathe slowly while sealed in a flooding steel chamber, in total darkness, with the ocean pressing in from every side. Panic killed as many men in escape trunks as the water did. 8 of them reached the surface alive. 5 were still swimming when the sun came up. O'Kane had been on the bridge when the torpedo hit. He and 3 others were thrown straight into the sea. No escape trunk, no lung, nothing but the water and the dark, and they could see her. Tang's bow was still above the surface, close enough to swim to. The ships they had sunk were still burning around them. For 8 hours he stayed afloat in that water, close enough to his own submarine to know exactly how many of his men were still inside it. Of the 87 men who sailed with Tang into the Formosa Strait, 9 survived the night. Richard O'Kane was one of them. At dawn, a Japanese escort ship pulled the survivors out of the water. The war, for them, was not over. It had only changed shape. Japan treated American submarine attacks on its merchant shipping as a war crime. That made O'Kane and his men more than prisoners. It made them defendants. They were taken to Ofuna, a camp that did not officially exist. The men held there were not registered as prisoners of war. The Red Cross was never told their names. Back home, their families were told only that they were missing. Interrogators pressed the survivors for submarine tactics, patrol routes, fleet movements. They gave up nothing that mattered. What followed was 10 months of beatings and starvation rations, first at Ofuna, then at a camp called Omori, as the war ground toward its end. The men who had survived a sinking submarine now had to survive this. For 10 months, Richard O'Kane did not know whether anyone outside that camp knew he was alive. On September 24, 1945, he was freed. He weighed close to 100 pounds. On March 27, 1946, President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around his neck for the 2 nights in the Formosa Strait when he refused to leave a convoy unfinished, boxed in by burning ships and enemy destroyers. Richard O'Kane. He memorized 1,000 silhouettes so he would never mistake a target in the dark. He stayed on an open bridge through a hail of gunfire rather than dive and let a convoy go. He went back into the strait when no one would have questioned him for going home, and he became a hero. But there is a part of this the citation does not carry. Twice in that war, a crew he belonged to was destroyed. The first time, Wahoo, he was not aboard. He had been sent away to take a command of his own, and every man he left behind was lost. The second time, he was aboard. He was the one who gave the order to fire. He spent the rest of his life carrying bows. He stayed in the Navy. He was promoted to captain, commanded the submarine school at New London, and retired a rear admiral in California. And then, in retirement, he did the only thing that was left to do. He wrote them down in 1977, a book about Tang. In 1987, a book about Wahoo. 2 lost crews, 2 books, not a memoir about a man with a Medal of Honor. The patrols, the ordinary days, the names. He died on February 16, 1994, 2 weeks after his 83rd birthday, and was buried at Arlington. Going all the way has a price, and it is not always paid by the man who decides to go. Most of us will never stand on a bridge with burning ships on every side and no way out but forward. But every one of us knows that moment, the one where you have already done enough, and you go one more round anyway. The extra ship nobody asked you to take. The hard call you could have let ring. The one more thing you did because stopping felt worse than continuing. We rarely get to know what that cost before we choose it, so ask yourself the question again, the one from the beginning. You have enough to go home. The second convoy is still out there. If you were there right now, on that bridge, in that dark, what would you do? It is 4 in the morning, and the water under your keel is 9 meters deep. You're standing on the bridge of a submarine that cannot dive, not because it's damaged, because there is nowhere to go. The sea floor is right there, close enough that a hard turn could put you on the bottom. Ahead of you, in the dark, is a harbor. It isn't on any chart you have. The approaches are mined, the rocks are unmarked, and inside that harbor, packed in tight, are more than 30 enemy ships, every one of them loaded, every one of them headed somewhere that will cost lives. You can turn around right now. You can radio the contact, log the position, and let someone else solve it. Nobody would ever question that. The book is on your side. Or you can take your boat in, knowing that if you fire, there is only one way out. An hour on the surface, at full speed through mines you cannot see, in water too shallow to hide in. Behind you, sleeping in their bunks, are 80-odd men who trusted you enough to close their eyes. Do you go in, or do you go home? If you were there right now, on that bridge, in that dark, what would you do? Today, we meet a man who went in. A submarine captain who fired rockets at an island, put 8 of his men ashore on Japanese soil and blew up a train, and who, after 5 war patrols, was proudest of a number that has nothing to do with any of it. The Medal of Honor, 4 Navy Crosses. His name was Eugene Fluckey. Let's find out. Before we begin, take a second to hit like and subscribe. Washington, D.C., October 5th, 1913. He was a city kid, and a fast one. He finished high school at 15. He earned Eagle Scout, the highest rank a boy could hold in scouting. It matters later, in a way nobody could have guessed at the time. The skills he learned in the woods as a boy were about to be used on an island in the North Pacific. June 13, 1931. He walked into the United States Naval Academy at 17. 4 years later, he was an ensign. He went to battleships first, then a destroyer. And then in 1938, he did something most of his classmates would not do. He volunteered for submarines. In the 1930s, a submarine was a steel pipe filled with batteries, diesel fumes, and men who did not get to see the sky for weeks. It was hot. It smelled. Promotion was slow. He loved it. Then the war came, and Eugene Fluckey spent the first year of it learning what failure feels like. He rode the submarine Bonita for 5 war patrols. 5 patrols, thousands of miles, almost nothing to show for it. Submarines came home in those first years with empty torpedo racks and nothing sunk. Bad torpedoes, cautious tactics, contacts that slipped away in the night. Crews stopped expecting to win. That is a thing that happens to men, quietly, and it is very hard to undo. Fluckey was not a naturally patient man about it. He spent those patrols writing things down. What worked, what didn't, what he would do differently if the boat were ever his. January 1944, it became his. USS Barb, fleet submarine. 311 feet of steel, 10 torpedo tubes, and the crew that had not yet learned what it was capable of. He was her 7th commanding officer, and he arrived with a private rule that he never wrote into any order book. He was going to sink everything he could find, and he was going to bring every single one of them home. Both, not one or the other. September 15th, 1944. He got an early lesson in what that rule would cost him. 3 days earlier, American submarines had torpedoed a Japanese convoy in the South China Sea. What none of them knew, until men began surfacing out of the oil, was what those ships had been carrying. Prisoners of war, British and Australian, thousands of them packed in the holds. Barb turned back into that water and pulled 14 of them out alive. Men who had been in the sea for days, men who had survived Singapore and the camps and then the torpedoes of their own side. Fluckey wrote later about what it did to his crew, hauling those men through the hatch, one at a time, into a boat that had no room for them. After that, the Barb went hunting like a different animal. December 19, 1944. The Barb sailed on her 11th war patrol. The hunting ground was the east coast of China. Shallow, crowded, badly charted water, the kind of place submarines were told to stay out of. January 8, a night surface action, 2 hours long, running battle. Barb sank a large ammunition ship. When those go, they do not sink. They disappear, and the flash lights the horizon, like a sunrise in the wrong direction. But the convoys kept thinning out. Fewer contacts. Emptier sea. Fluckey did the arithmetic. The ships weren't gone. They were hiding. The Japanese had started running their coastal traffic in daylight, hugging the shore and anchoring at night in harbors too shallow for a submarine to enter. It was a good plan. It worked because it was built on one assumption, that no submarine captain would be insane enough to follow them in. January 22nd, 1945. Barb tracked a convoy toward the mainland and watched it turn into an inlet called Nam Quan. Fluckey took the boat in behind them, on the surface, at night. Here is what that meant. In plain terms, the charts of that coast were decades old and mostly wrong. The approaches were mined. There were rocks nobody had ever marked. The water was 5 fathoms deep, 30 feet. A submarine's own hull is 16 feet tall. You cannot dive in 30 feet of water. There is no down. If anything goes wrong, a patrol boat, an aircraft, a searchlight, you cannot vanish. You can only run, and running out would take an hour on the surface, lit up by whatever you had just set on fire. He gathered his officers and laid it out, not as an order, as a proposition, with the arithmetic on the table. Then he took the Barb in. 3:20 in the morning. The radar operator started counting contacts and had to start over. 30 ships anchored in rows, riding quietly in 3 separate columns, in water so shallow that not one of them had bothered to post a proper screen. 3:52 in the morning. Fluckey raised his binoculars and saw them with his own eyes 3,000 yards away. He gave the order every submarine knows: battle stations, torpedoes. He had 8 torpedoes left. Forward. He fired all of them. 8 torpedoes into a harbor packed with anchor ships from 3,000 yards. 8 hits. An ammunition ship went up first. The explosion was so large that men on the bridge, men who had been at war for 2 years, instinctively ducked behind the steel. And then Eugene Fluckey turned his submarine around and ran for open water. This is the part that is hard to imagine properly. Behind him, a harbor was burning. Every gun on that coast now knew exactly where he was. A Japanese frigate was already firing. Ahead of him was an hour of mined, uncharted, 30-foot water, and no ability to submerge for a single second of it. He ordered the engines overloaded, 150%. The Barb hit 23.5 knots, faster than that class of submarine was ever designed to go, faster than any of them had gone before or since. She ran for an hour, on the surface, in the dark, over mines, with her own firelight behind her. And she got out. Not one man aboard was hurt. For that patrol, Commander Eugene Fluckey was awarded the Medal of Honor. He was not finished. June 1945. Barb went out again, carrying something no submarine had ever carried into combat. Fluckey had talked the Navy into giving him 72 rockets, 5-inch rockets, 10 pounds of explosive each, mounted on a launcher, bolted to the deck in front of the conning tower. Just after midnight on June 22nd, off the northeast coast of Hokkaido, the Barb surfaced and fired 12 of them at the town of Shari, the first submarine in history to bombard a shore with rockets. And still, that is not the thing he is remembered for. Because somewhere in those weeks, watching the coast of Karafuto through a periscope, Eugene Fluckey noticed a train, southern Sakhalin, then Japanese territory, a single railway line running along the coast, carrying supplies south, night after night, on a schedule. The line was too far inland for his deck gun. Torpedoes are for ships, so he decided to put men on the beach, 8 of them, all volunteers. Married men were not allowed to go. Chief gunner's mate Paul Saunders, electrician's mate Billy Hatfield, signalman Francis Sever, ship's cook Lawrence Newland, torpedoman Edward Klingesmith, motor machinist mates James Richard and John Marcuson, and Lieutenant William Walker in command. They had one problem. How do you make a bomb go off under a moving train, in the dark, without standing there to set it off? The answer came from Billy Hatfield, who as a boy had squeezed nuts under train wheels for fun and knew exactly how much a rail sags when a locomotive rolls over it. Rig a switch under the rail. Let the train close the circuit itself. Let the weight of the locomotive light its own fuse. The night of July 22nd into the morning of July 23rd, 1945, 8 American sailors paddled ashore onto Japanese home soil. They dug a hole between the ties with their hands and a pick. They buried 55 pounds of explosive. They set Hatfield's switch under the rail. Then they heard the train coming. Early, they ran. They ran for the boats with the charge already armed behind them, across open ground, toward the submarine sitting in shallow water with her engines turning. The explosion caught them halfway. A 16-car train went into the air behind them, and the whole beach lit up. Every one of the 8 got back aboard. It was the only landing by American forces on Japanese home soil in the entire war. It was, and remains, the only time a submarine has been credited with sinking a train. And the crew of the Barb painted it onto their battle flag, a locomotive right in the middle under the rows of ships. The war ended 3 weeks later. Officially, the Barb is credited with sinking 17 ships, 96,000 tons. Under Fluckey, in 5 patrols, she also destroyed a carrier, shelled shore installations, launched the first submarine rockets, and wrecked a train. The Medal of Honor was presented on March 23, 1945. 4 Navy Crosses, a Presidential Unit citation for his boat. But when people asked him late in his life which number meant the most to him, he never said any of those. He said this: "No one who ever served under my command was awarded the Purple Heart for being wounded or killed." 5 war patrols into a mined harbor, onto an enemy beach. Not one man wounded, not one man lost. He stayed in the Navy for another 27 years. He commanded submarines, then squadrons, then all the submarines in the Pacific. He served as Director of Naval Intelligence. He retired a Rear Admiral in 1972 after 37 years. And then he and his wife Marjorie moved to Portugal and spent 8 years running an orphanage. Marjorie died in 1979 after 42 years of marriage. He kept the orphanage going. In 1992, almost 50 years after the war, He finally wrote the book. He called it Thunder Below. It is not really about him. It is about the crew, their names, their jokes, the ice cream machine, the bunk assignments, the 80-odd men who went into Nam Quan Harbor and came back out. He died on June 28, 2007, at 93, and was buried at the Naval Academy Cemetery. We usually measure courage by what the person is willing to lose. Eugene Fluckey spent the war refusing that trade. He went into the most dangerous water anyone could find, over and over, on the stubborn premise that daring and carelessness are not the same thing, and that a commander who loses men has not proven anything except that he lost men. Most of us will never stand on a bridge with a burning harbor behind us. But every one of us has stood in front of a decision that could be made two ways. The safe way that costs nothing, and the right way that puts something at risk. And most of us, quietly, choose based on what happens to us if it goes wrong. He chose based on what happened to them. So ask yourself the question again, the one from the beginning. The harbor is full. The chart is blank. 80 men are asleep behind you. If you were there right now, on that bridge, in that dark, what would you do? A single sound. Metal, tapping on metal, somewhere above your head. You're lying in the dark, inside a steel tube, on the floor of the Atlantic. 243 feet of black water set between you and the sky. The submarine you served unflooded and went down this morning. Half the crew is gone. The men in the aft compartments never had a chance. Now the cold is coming through the hull, and the air is turning thin and sour. Every breath you take makes the next one worth a little less. You know what the Navy knows. In every submarine disaster before this one, the men on the bottom stayed on the bottom. No one has ever come down 243 feet and brought a sailor back alive. Not once. So you have a choice. Do you spend your strength hammering on the hull, trusting that someone up there has found a way? Or do you save your breath, close your eyes, and accept what the sea has always done to men like you? If you were there right now, in the dark, in the cold, listening to your own heartbeat, what would you do? Today, we meet a man who never sank an enemy ship, a submariner whose greatest victory was measured not in tonnage destroyed, but in men brought home from the bottom of the sea. He invented the way out of a sunken submarine, tested it with his own lungs, and then stood on a rolling deck and pulled 33 men back from a depth no rescue had ever reached. His name was Charles Momsen. The Navy called him Swede. Let's find out what he did. Before we begin, take a second to hit like and subscribe. June 21st, 1896. Flushing, New York. Charles Bowers Momsen is born into a Danish-American family, which doesn't stop the Navy from nicknaming him Swede, and the name sticks for the rest of his life. He fights his way into the Naval Academy at Annapolis. He graduates in 1919, an officer of a Navy that has just watched the First World War prove what submarines can do. Momsen chooses submarines. Small crews, thin steel, no room for error. A service where every man aboard knows the sea is trying to get in. By 1925, he commands a submarine of his own, the S-1. He is 29 years old. September 25, 1925. Off Block Island, a steamship rams the submarine S-51 in the night. She goes down in 130 feet of water with her crew inside. Momsen takes S-1 to the scene. What he finds is an oil slick spreading on the surface, and beneath it, somewhere, a steel hull full of men. There is nothing he can do. There is nothing anyone can do. The United States Navy, the most powerful navy on earth, has no way, none, to reach a man trapped in a sunken submarine. Momsen circles the slick until there is no reason left to circle. Almost every man aboard S-51 dies. Something in Momsen refuses to file this away as bad luck. In 1926, he sits down and writes a formal proposal to the Navy's Bureau of Construction and Repair. build a diving bell, a rescue chamber that can be lowered to a sunken submarine and carry her crew back to the surface. The Bureau reads it. The Bureau shelves it. Impractical, the drawing said. Not worth building. December 17th, 1927. Off Provincetown, Massachusetts, a Coast Guard destroyer rams the submarine S4. She sinks in 110 feet of water. This time, 6 men survive the sinking. They seal themselves in the forward torpedo room and wait. Divers reach the hull. Through the steel, they hear tapping. Morse code, hammered out by freezing hands. The tapping asks, "Is there any hope?" A storm rises. The equipment fails. The days pass. The honest answer comes back through the steel. No. The tapping slows. Then it stops. All 40 men of S4 are gone. 6 of them slowly, in the dark, asking a question their Navy could not answer. Momsen carries that question for the rest of his life, and he makes a decision that will define it. If the Navy will not build a way out, he will build it himself. The public outrage over S4 forces the Navy's hand. Suddenly the shelved ideas are worth looking at, and Momsen is the man they turn to. But Momsen has learned not to wait for permission. Working with a chief gunner's mate named Clarence Tibbles, he designed something a sailor can wear on his chest. A rubber bag, a canister of soda lime, a mouthpiece and a nose clip. Breathe out, and the chemicals scrub the poison from your breath. Breathe in, and the bag gives it back as air. Strap it on, flood the compartment, open the hatch, and rise, slowly, breathing all the way up a line toward the light. They build it in their off hours. They test it in a tank, and then in the muddy water of the Potomac River. Here is the thing about Swede Momsen. He never asked a sailor to trust a piece of equipment with his life, until Momsen had trusted it first with his own. In 1929, he takes his invention down to 200 feet himself. If the bag fails, the Navy loses an officer. The bag does not fail. The Navy gives him the Distinguished Service Medal. The fleet gives the device a better reward. They give it his name, the Momsen Lung. The Navy raises S4 from the bottom, the same submarine, the same steel that once carried the tapping of dying men. They rebuild her as a test ship, and Momsen takes her down on purpose. He floods her compartments, opens the hatch, and escapes from 40 feet. Then, with a torpedo man named Edward Kalinowski, from 207 feet, the boat that had asked, "Is there any hope?" becomes the boat that proves the answer is yes. And the diving bell, the shelved, impractical diving bell, it gets built after all. Momsen designs the prototype. A lieutenant commander named Alan McCann refines it into its final form. A steel chamber, shaped like a pear, lowered on a cable from a ship above. It seals itself over a submarine's escape hatch, opens the way, and carries men up, 7 or 8 at a time. When it enters service, the Navy names it the McCann Rescue Chamber. Another man's name on the machine Momsen conceived. Momsen keeps working because he is already chasing the next problem, depth itself. At the Washington Navy Yard, he leads an experimental diving unit, replacing the nitrogen in a diver's air with helium, work that will let divers go deeper than 300 feet and come back with their minds intact. 10 years of tanks, rivers, test escapes, and paperwork. 10 years of preparing for a day the Navy hoped would never come. May 23, 1939. Off the Isles of Shoals, New Hampshire, the brand new submarine USS Squalus slides under the Atlantic on a test dive. A main valve fails. The sea pours into her engine room. She hits the bottom at 243 feet, deeper than any rescue in history. 26 men drown in the flooded compartments before they can seal the doors. 33 are still alive in the forward half of the boat, in the cold and the dark. And in Washington, A telephone rings on Swede Momsen's desk. Momsen reaches Portsmouth with his divers and his equipment. Above the sunken Squalus, the rescue ship Falcon anchors and steadies herself against the swell. Swinging from her deck is the pear-shaped steel chamber. 10 years of Momsen's work, about to meet its first real test. Think about what is riding on this. If the chamber fails, 33 men die, the way the men of S-51 died, the way the men of S-4 died, slowly, beneath a navy that can only listen. May 24th. Late morning, the chamber goes down the guideline, through water that turns from green to black. It settles onto the escape hatch of the Squalus and seals. The hatch opens. Air from the surface spills into a compartment where 33 men have been rationing every breath. Up they come, 7 and 8 at a time. First trip, second trip, third. Each round trip takes hours. Lowering, sealing, loading, rising. On the surface, the survivors step onto Falcon's deck, gray-faced, shaking, alive. Then the last trip, the final 8 men, the last souls aboard Squalus, climb into the chamber, and it starts up through the dark. Partway to the surface, the hauling gear jams. The crew on Falcon ships to the wire itself, and then the wire begins to fray. Strand by strand, the steel unravels, 200 feet over the bottom of the Atlantic. Inside the chamber, 8 survivors who have already cheated death once feel their ride to the surface stop. Lower it back down. Momsen's team decides, gently, all the way to the seabed, before the wire lets go. A diver goes down into the dark to cut the fouled cable away. And then the men on Falcon's deck do the only thing left. They take hold of the wire with their hands, hand over hand, timing each pull to the roll of the ship. They haul the chamber up through 240 feet of water, not with machinery, with backs and palms and patience. The chamber breaks the surface. The hatch opens. The last 8 men of the Squalus climb out into the daylight. 33 men went to the bottom alive. 33 men came back. 13 hours of rescue, 4 trips of the chamber, 0 lives lost on the way up. It is the first time in history that men trapped in a sunken submarine have been rescued from the deep. The question hammered through the hull of S-4, is there any hope, finally has its answer. For the Squalus rescue, 4 men received the Medal of Honor: William Bathurst, Orson Crandall, James McDonald, John Mielowski. Divers and chamber operators, Momsen's men, Momsen himself, receives no Medal of Honor. Not for the rescue he led, not for the lung he breathed through at 200 feet, not in his entire career. The chamber that saved the Squalus survivors carries another officer's name to this day. He goes on serving. In the Second World War, he leads submarines into the Pacific, and when torpedoes keep failing against enemy hulls, Momsen does the most Momsen thing imaginable. He helps recover a live, unexploded torpedo from the water himself, so the flaw can be found and fixed. He retires a vice admiral. He dies in 1967, and the Navy buries him at Arlington. Today, a guided missile destroyer, USS Momsen, carries his name across the Pacific. But if you want to know what his work was truly worth, look at one more date. October 1944. The floor of the Pacific, 180 feet down. An American submarine lies sunk after her final, legendary patrol, USS Tang, the boat of Commander Richard O'Kane. If you've been with this series, you know that name. His story began this trilogy. In Tang's flooded forward room, trapped men strapped rubber bags to their chests, mumps and lungs. 5 of those men breathed their way up 180 feet of open ocean and lived, the only Americans in history to escape a sunken submarine with no help from the surface. 15 years earlier, a stubborn officer had carried an untested rubber bag into 200 feet of water because 2 crews had died listening for help that could not come. Every breath those 5 survivors took on the way up That was Swede Momsen, keeping a promise to men he never met. Courage is not always a moment. Sometimes courage is 10 years of unglamorous work on a problem everyone else has agreed to live with. Tested on your own body, paid for in advance, so that strangers you will never meet can have a way out. Most of us will never hear tapping through a steel hull. But every one of us knows that moment, when a problem is real and ignoring it is easier, and fixing it will cost us something no one will ever thank us for. So go back to the bottom of the Atlantic, one more time, 243 feet down, in the cold, listening. If you were there right now, would you believe someone was coming? Because of one man, 33 sailors were right to believe. This concludes this episode. Thank you for watching Forgotten Valor. Next, we'll meet a Green Beret who heard the doctor say he would never walk again and answered them by running straight into 6 hours of hell to carry 8 men out on a bag full of shrapnel. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to support us. Thank you. Their stories were nearly lost. Subscribe so they are never forgotten.